Howdy everybody! Today I'm going to be talking about the new Ethan Coen movie, Drive-Away Dolls. A movie that was pretty good, but is also slightly made better by the fact that it allows me to vamp about the Beatles for a minute. Alright, so the film is Ethan Coen's first directorial effort as a solo filmmaker outside of directing a documentary a few years ago. It takes place in 1999 and follows two women who are on the way from Philadelphia to Tallahassee in a borrowed vehicle that, unbeknownst to them, holds some precious cargo. In the lead roles, we have Margaret Quallay and Geraldine Viswanathan, and what comes of their journey is a somewhat typical road trip comedy mixed with elements of a crime thriller. The movies that this reminded me the most of while I was at the theater was stuff like David Lynch's Wild at Heart, Ridley Scott's Thelma and Louise, and maybe just like a tiny smattering of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. However, while certain elements from the plot and various shots and character choices within the movie itself definitely owe something to those aforementioned movies, I do think that this has a lot of Ethan Coen's trademark charm to it. So, this is the part where I get to explain what I mean by that, and I get to use my Beatles metaphor that I've literally been saving since the first act of this movie. I was basically in the theater watching this, and then I had this moment where I became Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at his TV, and I was just like, oh, that's it. This is great. I need to actually make sure I say this. It's basically the reason why I'm making this video, if I can be so blunt. I had this comparison. It was too good. It made my brain experience joy for the first time in God knows how long, so I decided to go ahead and do a quick short review, hopefully, of this movie just to say it. So, right off the bat, I have not seen that many Coen brother movies. I'm putting it out there. It's like a huge blind spot in my lifetime of watching movies, and I'm not ashamed of it. In fact, it's actually partially the catalyst for a project I'm working on, which if you're curious about, you can just subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. But yeah, I am not the most familiar when it comes to the Coen brothers. I've seen The Big Lebowski, I've seen There Will Be Blood, and I've probably seen maybe one or two more of their movies over the years, but I really am super green when it comes to their filmography. And despite that, the overriding thing I felt while I was watching this movie was that Ethan Coen is supposed to be the funny one.
Spanish moss and live oak.
Curly here.
Don't call me Curly.
And your name Curly?
My name is Curly. We just met. It's too familiar.
Right? They've made all these movies together. They've worked together on many films over the years. We saw what Joel Coen made on his own a couple of years back, and now we have Ethan Coen, and we can see just from the approach to this movie, the way it was this constantly funny flick, that he's the funny one. And the Beatles comparison I wanted to bring up was that he is the Paul McCartney to Joel's John Lennon. Now, what I mean by that is that Joel is, at least from what I can glean based off of the very limited exposure I have to their filmography, he is the half of the coin that brings forth the more social, dramatic elements to the films they've worked on together, while Ethan is the fun-loving, funny man who, again, to use Paul McCartney as the template, likes to write silly love songs. That's not to say that this movie was bad, though. In fact, quite the opposite, because I did ultimately enjoy this movie. If you don't want to wait for me to get into detail a little bit, or you just need to go somewhere, or you feel like clicking out, I'll say it from now. This movie is definitely a fun one. It's worth your time, but maybe wait until it hits streaming, because I think it'll actually work a bit better within a home environment. That's just me, but whatever. At any rate, I do think my Beatles comparison is apt because while I was watching Drive-Away Dolls, the one thing I kept thinking to myself was what this movie needed and how if Joel was there, we might have actually have gotten a little bit of that. That's not a knock on this film. Again, I do ultimately like it. I just said as much. But Drive-Away Dolls had this problem where it just allowed things to happen without necessarily giving them time to breathe. And on the surface, this is all fine because the movie is very clearly not trying to be this big drama. It's not trying to be a necessarily compelling crime thriller or anything like that. It is a comedy at the end of the day. But it also had such a fun world and such interesting characters that I couldn't help but want to go beneath the surface with them a little bit. So while the film may be like explicitly trying to be like a modern sexploitation movie, or it may try to be like extremely camp and just fun-loving and wild, it does also have the potential to offer some insights that have a bit more ambition to them, for lack of a better term. I guess like the comparison I'm trying to make is like The Big Lebowski, for all of its fun and all of its crazy moments and all of that. You know, like that sequence where the dude is like flying through the air and it's totally ripping off Richard Donner's Superman. It also says something about the character. It allows us to understand him and his world, and it kind of gives us like some insights, right? Like The Big Lebowski is a fun comedy, but it also does like kind of say something about society. And Drive-Away Dolls had the potential to do just that. There was without spoiling anything, because this isn't a spoiler video, there is a moment that's in the trailer where a line is said, and in the movie, it gets so close to using that line as like a jumping off point to make some great statement. It's so close, and it's almost there, and I was waiting for it, and then it just doesn't.
Who are you?
Democrats.
The movie just barrels ahead with its very, very tight 90-minute runtime. It's somewhere in the 90-minute range, and you kind of forget about it. And it's a shame because, again, the material's there. I feel like there needs to be a guiding voice to help bring it to its like full potential. And maybe I'm being unfair, right? Because the Coen brothers are like such a instrumental part of like 90s filmmaking and through the early 2000s and stuff like that. But so what? You know, I think it's fine to say that like an artist you like or an artist you have heard a lot about kind of just put something out that was only okay. And ultimately, Drive-Away Dolls is more on the okay side than it is like the really good side. That's not really an insult to him. As a filmmaker, he's way more talented than I ever could be, obviously. But yeah, there was just like so many moments where I was like, oh, I wonder how this would have gone if. And that's why I have to go back to the Beatles thing I mentioned, because like for any Beatles fans out there, you listen to some of the solo John Lennon stuff, you listen to some of the solo Paul McCartney stuff, you love it, it's great, and you kind of wonder like, oh, how would Live and Let Die have gone if George was playing guitar on it? Or how would Mind Games have come out different if, you know, Paul was in the mixing, like he was in the process of like mixing it, you know? It's just these sort of what if questions that when you're a hugely influential artist, you kind of inadvertently lend yourself to having asked.
That is about the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I'm a cop.
That sentence didn't come out right, but I think the point still stands. Like, when you're of a certain stature, people are always going to hold you up to your best work, for better or for worse. And especially when you're part of like a band or a group of people that have made some highly influential work, people are always going to go, well, maybe this would have come out a bit better if you got the band back together. Well, this is great, but the middle section of Band on the Run could have totally benefited from John Lennon. Stuff like that. It isn't necessarily true, but it's one of the things where you're just going to run into it as an artist. Now, as for this film and what it actually is and not what it could have been, it is a fun time. I called it a sexploitation movie, I called it camp, and it's exactly that. This is a light, breezy movie you can sit down and just enjoy. It does have a few little things to say. It does have an emotional arc for its characters that I actually quite liked, but you aren't going to cry at the end of this movie. You're going to be grinning. I loved the last shot of this movie, mainly because like the visual metaphor for the arc these characters have gone on is so funny and so great, but the the way it ends, almost like discarding the visual metaphor it had just spent setting up, was not only really funny on a literal, like it was just really funny for starters, but it was also kind of poetic in its own way. Not like over the top poetic, but it was kind of like, oh yeah, I guess this is sort of like, this kind of still works. It kind of fits what they were going for, I guess, is what I'm trying to, explain. Also, cast-wise, this was really, really well cast. However, I do have to lead by saying that if you're going into this movie because you saw the trailer and you saw like Matt Damon and Pedro Pascall in it and stuff, don't allow it to trick you, they're like barely in the movie. This is very much Margaret Quallay and Geraldine Viswanathan's show. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I actually haven't seen her in anything else, so I'm reading it blind. But yeah, this is very much their show. They are the main characters. We follow them for basically the entire movie, with the exception of these like two stooges that have to kind of track them down. And they do so much with the material, especially Margaret Quallay, who's like, just seeing her play such like an over-the-top character that she is in this movie was a delight. To go back to my way earlier comparison to Wild at Heart, she reminded me of Sailor from that movie. Like the Nicolas Cage character who like acts like he's Elvis Presley. Yeah, she very much is like cut from the same cloth as him and Susan Sarandon in Thelma and Louise, as Louise, obviously. So when I say that, I say it because she speaks in this over-the-top Southern accent that I don't even know is like, I don't know whether or not that's an accurate Southern accent, but it's so funny to listen to, and it has so much of that Nicolas Cage Elvis impersonation imbued into it. It really, like, I really want to know if she had watched Wild at Heart while she was preparing for this movie, and if that was like a huge inspiration for her, because it wouldn't surprise me if it was. To the point where it felt so artificial, and it stood out like such a sore thumb to me that while I was watching the movie, there was this one throwaway line she makes about New England and people from New England, to where I was like, that's a setup, right? There's definitely going to be like this reveal at the end of the movie, something dramatic's going to happen, maybe someone has a gun pointed at her, and she's going to drop the Southern like drawl, and she's just going to be like talking like a person from New England for the rest of the movie. And that didn't end up happening, but I loved it. I still thought the accent was a lot of fun. It just stood out to me, and it felt like, oh, there might have been something there, but I guess not, you know?
I've had it with love. I don't believe it's relevant to the 21st century lesbian.
As for her character herself, she's sort of like this free-spirited person. She's trying to get her friend to come out of her shell, trying to help her like hook up with girls and all that stuff, and it's so delightful. I could literally have done without like the crime element of this movie on some level if we just got more of that. Like, for example, if they just decided, you know what, there's no briefcase, there's no intrigue to this movie, we're just gonna remake the movie Swingers, and we're gonna have like these two characters at the center of it instead of, I think it was Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn or something. I haven't seen Swingers in 10 years, so I could be completely off base. That said, it's not like the crime itself wasn't interesting. I actually really appreciated how outright funny it was in hindsight, because without like spoiling it, you know, without telling you or anything, the actual crime itself is so funny and so stupid at the same time. And it kind of does, like, okay, I'm actually starting to process the movie a little bit. Like, earlier I was saying that this movie could have been about something, and I think that finding out what these people are pursuing, what these two characters have and they're being hunted over, it's such a great thing. Like, it actually says a lot about its subject matter and how outright stupid and unimportant it is. And even the idea of like the MacGuffin of this movie, this briefcase, having what's in it, like, I think it's so, without telling you what it is, I think it's really funny and just it's so perfect. I was in the theater and I was surprised that nobody else laughed at it. Like, it wasn't a packed house or anything. I think there were maybe like a dozen people there total. And I think I was the only one that found it funny. And I'm just like, wait, really? Like, am I in a room with a bunch of prudes, or is this like actually not funny? Because I think it's freaking hilarious. And even better, it isn't random. That's the best part about it. Like, the object, this MacGuffin, isn't random, and it's technically like hinted at earlier in the movie, very subtly during like this one scene at an apartment. And you see it and it's like, oh, okay, that was just like a funny detail, it was a funny joke. And then it comes back sort of in its own way later, and you're like, ah, shit. This movie's got hands. Okay, all right, I see what you're doing there. Yeah, just a delightful MacGuffin. Also, one thing that I do want to bring up is going back to like the Big Lebowski stuff, because this felt like something almost straight out of the Big Lebowski for me. There are these like dream sequences throughout the movie. I feel like I'm I'm back talking about Madam Web because I'm talking about dream sequences and visions. There are these like sort of hallucinogenic visions partway through the movie, and they come out of nowhere, and they sort of don't have like a clear tethering to the movie until the end. Like you don't know what they are, and you just kind of take them as like weird, maybe transitions between scenes, you know, in the same way that a Star Wars movie does those like hideous feathered wipes because it's like paying homage to something. You just think like, oh no, it's just trying to be this campy, colorful movie. These are transitions. And then it actually gets explained later. Just another example of the movie having a really great sense of humor and using it for foreshadowing. Also, of all things, Miley Cyrus is in this movie for these aforementioned transitions. And it's so funny because she's like in the trailer. So you go there. I don't know if I would have preferred to have her in the trailer or not, because she isn't like actually a character in the movie. To the point where she isn't credited, by the way. Like if you go on the Letterboxd, it says she's in the movie, but it says it's uncredited because she's barely in this thing. And I think it would have been funnier if they didn't put her in the trailer and they just like allowed us to just see Miley Cyrus in these transitions. I thought for a second that these transitions were from Margaret Qualley's perspective because she has that like thick Southern accent, and Miley Cyrus is sort of doing exactly that. She's like in full Southern accent mode in this, and it turns out I was completely wrong, but it was good to see her in there. I mean, that's cool. I like her Flowers song. I prefer the Beach Boys style cover some guy on TikTok made of it, but I do actually quite like that song, so I'm not complaining, like, about that at least. I do have like some minor complaints, but besides what I said about the movie, just like needing a bit more like pathos maybe, or logos, or one of the Socratic reasons or methods of persuasion or whatever. Other than that, my complaint with the movie was like the trailer, actually. Other than just showing Miley Cyrus, a lot of the best parts of this movie are in the trailer. Not all of them, because some of them you just can't show in a movie trailer, unfortunately. But a lot of the best stuff is there already. And I get it. You're trying to sell the movie to people, so you have to show like exciting parts of it. But almost every major set piece in this film was just in the trailer. And that's kind of a bummer because I was watching the movie in theaters and I kind of felt like I had been there before and I'd seen this already. Not only because the material is, for the most part, very familiar territory, like it doesn't really do anything new or innovative, but because like I had literally seen these in the trailer already. But whatever. Minor complaint. It got me to see the movie, and I'm ultimately glad that I saw the movie, so I can't really hold it against the film. I'll just hold it against the trailer house, I guess. My other complaint, and this is just purely a me thing, was I caught it at an AMC where there was a dead pixel. And this is like, this is nitpicking, and I'm calling it nitpicking, but there was a dead pixel at the AMC I saw this at, and it distracted me for literally like a tenth of the movie. Because like I noticed it halfway through the film, and because, you know, I make videos, I work with video, I take out hot and dead pixels from footage I shoot for my channel. That dead pixel was there, and I was just like, I was dying inside. I could not stop looking at it, and I had to like, I couldn't tell if it was the movie itself or if it was, you know, like actually the theater. I think it was the theater, because the movie looks to me like it may have been shot on film, or very convincingly like made to look like it was, or maybe when it was like finished, they just like printed it through a 35 millimeter, you know, like print and then rescanned it digitally. But yeah, that sucked. It sucked that there was a dead pixel that kept distracting me. And it was right on the upper right hand like intersection. So if you're a camera guy, like, you know, your rule of thirds, there's the two lines, and it breaks everything up into 9 quadrants. So, it was right at the top right intersection. And when you're framing something for a camera, it is the one spot where you try to put people in a frame. So that I died inside a little bit. But, you know, other than that, Drive Away Dolls was a pretty good time. I think it was a solid 3 out of 5 kind of movie. You rent it, you watch it on Netflix or something, and you talk about it with your friends, you have a good time. But I don't know how many times in the future I'll be coming back to this one. Outside of like the performance Margaret Quallay gave in it, and Matt Damon's character, who was, you know, he was pretty good with what he got. I thought he was really funny, and he was super, super well casted for his character, I think, because he just plays that sort of, for lack of a better term, paranoid person very well. But outside of that, yeah, I don't know if I'll be returning to this one. I called it a 3 out of 5, and on my Letterboxd, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, and those grades feel about right. Now, as for why I got the extra half star, I did have to give it that. I was forced to. They forced my hand because they needle dropped 2 of my favorite bands/musicians, with the first one being a needle drop to Funkadelic's Maggot Brain, which is like one of my favorite songs of all time. If you like guitar solos, yeah, definitely need to listen to this one because it's basically a 10-minute guitar solo. And the other one being Lizzie Mercer de Clu's Fire, which is a great song. I actually discovered her just like over the summer while I was writing my book, and so good. I mean, she is literally like, she reminds me of like the Talking Heads a little bit. My favorite song by her in particular is very Talking Headsy. It's Roommate. But they played her like most well-known song in this movie right at the end, and it was so good. I like, my ears perked up in the theater, and I was like, crap, I have to give this movie like an extra half a star because that made me just so happy inside. That said, yeah, Drive-Away Dolls. I may have called it Drive-By Dolls at some point during this video, and I'm sorry if I did. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty good time. I'm glad I saw it as a matinee because, well, other than the fact that I have AMC A-List and all the tickets cost the same to me anyway, like, this does feel like if you're gonna see it in theaters, maybe see it as a matinee or go with like a friend that you might be able to like whisper to during the movie and stuff, because it really is more of a communal sort of movie. And I stand by my my statement that it like is worth watching, but probably on streaming. You know, there's a lot of great movies in theaters right now, and if you can only go to see like Dune Part 2 or like, you know, one of the Oscar contenders that are having another theatrical run, or the new Wim Wenders movie, which I wanted to see today and then I chose this because it was at a more convenient time for me. Yeah, maybe go see those and then check this out if it's still in theaters, or just wait until it hits digital. One thing I will say, one thing I'm very grateful for, is it reminded me of how I haven't seen that many Coen brother movies. That's a good thing, because it reminded me of that, and it was good enough to make me go, oh yeah, I should like, you know, I should check out Fargo tonight, or I should check out, you know, whatever, Burn After Reading, or like one of their other movies, right? So that's a good thing. The net positive from this movie is that it reminded me that I should check out other Coen brother movies, and it didn't piss me off. Like, it was a good movie, ultimately. I don't know why they stopped making movies together, and I won't pretend to, like, I'm not going to pretend to know why, right? But it's interesting to see what both of their first solo efforts were like, and to be able to hold it up against their more well-known stuff and just kind of go like, oh yeah, you know, you see both sides of the coin now. It's very interesting to be able to do that. I'm glad that we can. And I'm really curious, like, now that Ethan Coen has made his like first solo feature film, not counting the documentary he made, right? We're talking strictly like narrative film. I'm really curious to see where he goes, and like, does he try to interject some of his brother's style into his next film by himself? Or does he kind of double down on his side of the coin, and does he try to continue to make, going back to the Beatles again, like more silly love song kind of movies? I think that it's a little disingenuous to say that he only makes silly love songs. That's all he brings to the table. I'm not saying that literally, but you can tell that he's the silly little critter of the bunch, right? Like, you can just imagine him and Sam Raimi like giggling on the set of that movie they made together, and just being like, yeah, this is the close friendship. This is what these two, they're two peas in a pod, you know? Now, that's the end of the review, but I am curious because my friend Raekwon and I are working on a series that we're really excited to debut in the near future, hopefully. And it's going to center around movies just like the ones I was talking about from the Coen brothers that I haven't seen. We're going to be talking about iconic, how haven't you seen these kind of movies? And I want to know, what's a movie for you? Like, what's a really seminal, famous film that you took forever to actually sit down and watch? I have a million of them, which is why we're making a whole series dedicated to it. So If you have one and you feel like sharing it, feel free to drop it in the comments. We'll all be cool, I promise. Nobody be a dick about it. Like, there are a gajillion movies out there. Not everyone has seen every movie ever made, and just because they haven't doesn't mean they're any less of a cinephile or whatever, right? And if you enjoy these kind of sit-down, impromptu videos from me, also let me know, because I do want to continue to make like proper video essays about like subjects with a bit of research and stuff put into it, or a bit of forethought, or at least like a script. But I also enjoy doing these sort of podcast style videos. So yeah, if you're enjoying them and you want to see them continue to get made, let me know. Let me know if you'd prefer if I keep doing them for newer movies that are still in theaters, or if you'd be down to just like hear me rant about, I don't know, like Ed Wood after I see it for the millionth time. That's like an old standby for this channel. I think I've made like 2 or 3 videos about that movie already, and I could probably keep going, but I don't know, maybe using this as like a glorified letterbox might be kind of interesting for people, who knows? At any rate, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that if you do go ahead and see Drive Away Dolls, that you enjoy it. It's a good movie. So yeah, bye.